Before we start, if you don't mind, go ahead. If y'all can hear my voice, I would love it if you can sit kind of close to me. Can you sit in the middle, if that's all right? I love you, Sue. And do y'all mind if I can see you better? It'd be so fantastic for the humble teacher. I'd love to be able to see y'all. And also, if you would open up your Hill Church app, go to small groups, find this group, and join it. Join this group. Go to Hill Church app, click small groups, find this study, and click join group. Go to the Hill Church app, small group, find this group, and join it. And then some of you are already in the group because I added you because I knew you'd be there. Jennifer, you already says joined. Okay, that's it. Yours says view group because I already made you a one. So go to the small group, click join. There's about 4 of y'all already added because I assumed you'd be here. Yeah, they're about to hop up. 2 codes? Try either. I don't know. Oh, just try one. I don't know. Yeah, just try one of them. See if the other one work. Hello, hello. So one more time, if you have the Hill Church app, click the Hill Church app, go to small groups, click this study, and click join group. Your attendance will be recorded. It's more than attendance. In this group, if you join it, you have access to the resources I have posted. Sometimes the apps just trust certain people. So I tell you. So good morning, everyone. Glad you're here. If you're watching us online, not yet. Okay. I'll wait till we're online. So go to your small groups, find Genesis, click join group. Once you join the group, you can see the resources. There's a drop-down menu. One says messages. I put a message that says click the. If you hit resources, you'll see some video, a link, 3 books I recommend. You'll see the outline that you have a paper outline in front of you. And I will always send emails and updates to this group that way. Would it automatically give notifications? I don't know. I haven't tried that yet. That's a good question. That's a good question. Well, I think it will with inside your profile. I don't know if it'll go through your cell phone, but I think if you click your profile, it'll say you have messages. There'll be a little bell signal. I'm almost positive. Almost positive. Are we online? Do you see it on Facebook, anybody? Anybody see the piece of paper back there? Did you get your notes on that table back there? The Genesis study? Okay. We are live? Good. Thought so. Good. All right, so one more time, if you're watching us online, go to the Hill Church app, click small groups. Once you click small group, scroll down and see Pastor Study, Genesis. Click it, then join the group. That will make your attendance in there, and then once you click it, you can go inside the group, and there's a drop-down menu of messages, resources. Click resources. You'll see it. All the books I recommend with direct links to Amazon. You'll see this outline in PDF. And if you need any help about joining the group after the service or right now, pass your phone around. Someone can help you. If you haven't, did you get it? Good. Find a Gen Zer, we've been told. And a millennial. We can help some people. Sarah's a helper. Raise your hand if you need help right now, otherwise we'll get started. Yes, man, need help? Thank you, John. Thank you. Anybody else need help? All right. Thank you. Bud needs help? Well, it did a security code to make sure he's the right person. Security code matters because it's okay. Yeah. Security codes matter because around the globe people are trying to hack into everything, and they really do, including Hill Church's apps. We get fake prayer requests sometimes, people trying to. Yeah. They keep saying they're from the elders, a guy named Justin, but I don't believe them. I know the Chinese are at work. No, they really do hack. That profile is fantastic because you can upload your pictures, all kinds of stuff. I'll talk more about that later. Okay, can we commence? Can we get started? That's right. I know the first will be a little different. And then every single time you're here each Sunday morning, you go back to your group and just mark you're here. You mark your attendance in your group. That's any small group you attend ever. May you help? John's the helper. Okay, let's get started if we can. You should have an outline, a handout in front of you. The outline should say outline by John H. Walton on it. There's only one handout. Again, this exact PDF is now in your Planning Center group you just joined. If you do a drop under the group, resources, you'll see this exact PDF. And there you go. What I want to do in this study is today, if I can, today we're actually not going to start with Genesis because there's way too much to do in introduction. I would do a massive disservice to you if we say chapter 1, verse 1. I would spend so much time unpacking stuff. So today is an intro to Genesis, and I mean a introduction to an introduction. But before I do that, I want to make sure it's just worth your time, okay? So if you'll turn over the outline at the very top, you'll see a thing that says Genesis 1 to 11, has a little globe on it. Do you see that? All right. I feel there's a little bit of confusion right now. Are y'all with me? Thank you. Sharon, you come sit by me and come. I'm kidding. Do we need to wait? Are you okay? Can we get started? It's so bright I actually can't see you well. Good? All right. Genesis, I'm in Genesis 1 through 11. Oh, perfect. Thank you. That's much better. Much better. Genesis 1 through 11 is generally considered a primeval history. Genesis 1 through 11 has a once upon a time quality about it. It's it's almost impossible to find historical anchors and time stamps in Genesis 1 through 11. Once we get Genesis 12, things change. Genesis 12 is the call of Abraham, and further details come of his Abrahamic covenant and so forth. Genesis 1 through 11 is quite different. It's distinct. And it's not radically different, but it is different. And that's why it's very common in scholarship, well, it's universal, to treat Genesis 1 through 11 as one unit, overarching theme, and then 12 and following is different, 12 to about 50, 51. Okay, so that's why I'm just doing that part. If for some reason we just fall in love with Genesis and want to continue, we can. I actually want to probably move on to something else after we get past chapter 11. You need to understand that the entire Old Testament, and Genesis, of which Genesis is a part, almost certainly, well, it just is, okay? It just is. It is the product of a long, complex tradition of oral and written sources. And probably about 300 years ago, maybe the early 17th century, maybe 354 years ago, people started writing and started, hey, have you ever noticed how in the Hebrew there's different words, names for God? Elohim, Elohim, another one is Yahweh. And when they use the name of God, they tend to have a particular theological slant. Yeah, how about that? And over time, scholars picked up more and more and more of that. And what they came to the conclusion, based on the evidence in the text itself, is that there are at least 4, if not more, major different streams of Jewish thought inside of the Old Testament. And sometimes I feel scared to tell you what scholars think because that's why I do this in a Bible study. So we can talk if you want to dialogue about this, certainly after, certainly over coffee and lunch. I'm serious about this. You're like, David, this goes against everything I've ever learned in church. I know, and I appreciate that. I do, and I respect it. I've been in ministry for a long time, and and I appreciate and respect that. So it doesn't upset me to have conversations. But if some of this feels like big bombs to you, I am sorry. They're not meant to be bombs. I'm trying to have integrity when I teach this and try to do the best I can with what I find persuasive. And everybody in scholarship is convinced of what I just said. Everybody in scholarship is convinced that Genesis and all the Old Testament is the product of a long, complex tradition of various authors and editors. Now, there's oral tradition that dates way back. There are some written segments of the Bible that date way back. But by the time it was finished and put all together was probably around the 6th century BC. Virtually every scholar on the planet concurs with the Old Testament specialist for a lot of really good reasons. And the idea is that after the Jews came out of the Babylonian exile around 586 BC, or say all the way to 515 BC, when Ezra and Nehemiah were written, they came back after Babylonian exile. Around the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, virtually every Old Testament scholar believes that's when the Jews put together what we call the Old Testament. Around then. That doesn't mean they all made it up from de novo, from nothing, right then and there. No. But it does mean the final product of what we call the Old Testament was finished around then. Now, that matters. It doesn't matter that much for our study today, but it does matter because when you read any kind of scholar in Genesis today, what they're going to say is you need to understand that because, one is they're convinced it's true. Two, it informs how we understand the text. The interpretation is influenced because if that's true, and there's really good reasons to believe that's true, that it was finalized, put together by the 6th century BC, it means that we should read it that way and understand that the Jews who put it together had just come from the worst defeat in the history of Judaism, had profound theological problems and quandaries about is God even there? Are we his people? Does the covenant even matter? And so they put these different texts together to remind themselves, yes, he is, even from the very beginning of time, as it were. He formed it and formed us to a people group. Now, I'm only saying that, and I'll move on pretty quickly, but this is, again, just as a word, just standard. And so I will assume that, but not make a big deal of it, but every once in a while I will. Another reason why that matters in the composition history is because of the very next thing, which is what scholars do as human beings when we go to school, and you all do the same thing in the real world. You pick up a newspaper, and as you flip to the newspaper, some of you people who still know what a newspaper is, and you're flipping through it, you know there's a difference when it shows sun and clouds versus donkeys and elephants talking versus editorials versus sports scores. You instantaneously switch between genres. Genre is a French word meaning literary type. You know that what a meteorological report, a weather report is, and that's not the same. And no one in their right mind thinks anybody thinks elephants and donkeys talk. You know instantaneously that's political cartoons or satire. And it's speaking a truth, but not the truth that elephants really talk. No more than if I said, I met my wife and I felt butterflies in my stomach. And you go, well, what kind of butterflies were they? No, you missed the whole point. No, that's what you said. Well, that is what I said, but that's not the truth I'm trying to convey. Then why are you lying? Are you saying you're a liar? I'm not lying at all. The truth I'm trying to convey is I felt something. Why'd you say butterflies? How am I going to say? It's a metaphor. I'm trying to express the fact that I felt so excited to see my wife. Well, say that. Well, what if I don't want to say it that way? What if I want to use poetry? What if I want to use metaphor? Who are you to be the word police? That's exactly what Christians do for the authors of the Bible. It's exactly what they do. They're the word police. No, if that's what they wanted to say, they would have said it that way. Who are you to say that? You didn't write the Bible. So what scholars do is we go, what's the genre? We all do it. We do in the real world. We don't read a cookbook like we do a weather report. That would be our poetry. It's nonsense. You would burn every cake. 350 is a metaphor for butterflies. No, it's not. It's ridiculous. We all do it. And we go to the Bible and we get dumb. Well, the biblical authors used the best genres they had available to communicate the truth they wanted to communicate. Period. Throughout the Psalms, in different sections, for example, one time it says King David said that God speaks to me in my kidneys. That's what it says in the Hebrew. He speaks in my kidneys. So why would he say that? Because they were convinced that was this place where you felt things and sometimes even thought things. Well, no one thinks that today, but they did. Is that the point, though? He's teaching me about how kidneys function? I can go on a laundry list of things. So what they did was they used the genre that they knew in the audience the best and communicated the truth they did. Today, if I want to talk about the history of America, I'm going to use the historical terms. If I want to talk about love, I'm going to write a poem or a sonnet. Well, in the ancient world, they had two different kinds of their similar genres. We know this from an enormous amount of discoveries called a cosmology. It just means the origin of created order. I tend not to use the word cosmos because we start thinking universe. I'll get that in a second. Cosmogony means the birth of things, the beginning of things. And so basically, these are genres of how things came to be. But the way they like to talk about the way things came to be, they followed very similar patterns that made it a genre. Like if you read a poetry book, there's metaphor, symbolism, hyperbole. Well, they did the same thing. What did not exist in the ancient world was the genre called science textbook. There's no genre called textbook. Didn't exist. It didn't exist. They don't know how, they would, If they open up a chemistry textbook today, they wouldn't know what to do with it. They don't have that genre. They don't speak that way. Instead, what they did is they didn't, and also Genesis, when we read it in the ancient world, it is not a kind of history. There are historical narratives called the Annals of the Kings. That's in 1, 2 Kings, also particularly 1, 2 Chronicles. Then we start having it reads it just reads very different. The vocabulary is different. The way they talk about it is different. It's very evident in the Hebrew. In the ancient world, there are all kinds of literature we have discovered, we humans, from Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, the Canaanite religion, which was all in Israel, that area. But there's a few that stand out as very relevant when we study Genesis, like the Tel of Adapha, the Enuma Elish is especially very important, the Atrahasis epic and the Gilgamesh epic. When you read these stories and the ancient world of different time periods, you realize, especially if you read them back to back to back, you go, oh, this is a genre. This is a genre. This is a writing style like a cookbook or a weather this or whatever. They go, oh. So then it's they're trying to tell what they understand to be the truth is. The question is, what truth are they trying to convey? So when scholars read Genesis, they do not start from 2023 and then go back and say, oh, Earth, they must be ancient scientists. There's nobody in the ancient world had the role of scientist. They didn't exist. Even the concept didn't exist to them. They didn't have the concept of that. They weren't dummies, but they did not think that way. And so what scholars do, and this is the only way I'll present it. So instead of me giving you, because this is not an undergraduate or master certainly level PhD course on all of Genesis, this is just a Bible study to some small group at a church. So what I'm doing is, like with anything, Revelation or Mark or whatever, I'm trying to expose you to things and then give you what I find the most persuasive. And then I encourage you to read everybody you want to read and study and do all the lectures and do it all. And you don't have to find what I'm saying persuasive. But I'm telling you, I really want you to do that. I want you to read as much as you want to. But if you don't want to, that's fine. So what scholars do is they say, hey, let's read anything in the books and say, is there a genre that God would have used through the authors to write? Sure, that's right, they did it. And we call them cosmologies. So the best way to understand Genesis is to read what a cosmology is supposed to be. Another thing that cosmologies have in common, and Genesis is no different, is an etiology. That's a story of asking Daddy, how come? Why? Why? Why does it hurt when women have babies? I tell you, son, because a long time ago, she's a dirty, rotten sinner. I'm just kidding, I didn't say that, but that's the answer. Daddy, why is it so hard to farm all day long? I tell you, son, long time ago, Uh, Daddy, why are people here? Daddy, why are there 7 days a week? Daddy, why do we take a break on the seventh day? Daddy, why? And cosmologies are full of etiologies, the how come stories. And so scholars are convinced that all the Old Testament, particularly Genesis, is full of etiologies, the answering the how come. Okay, so when we go to Genesis, what I will do, what I find persuasive, is to go and read ancient context. Let me say a quick word about that, and I'll move on. One more thing, and I'll move on. Okay. What people do when scholars read ancient literature like the Enuma Elish, the Gilgamesh epic, what they do is they lay out all this literature and they compare and contrast it to other literature. There are, there are features of Genesis that are very similar to Enuma Elish and others. And scholars argue, why are they so similar? Did God inspire all the pagans everywhere to have the same views? Maybe. What most scholars say is no, these other epics, these other big important stories and cultures were known to the Israelites, especially if they finished the story by the 6th century BC. These things were written way before them. So the response typically is these are views that ancient people held in common. So when it's in common, they go, yeah, that's what people believed about the ancient world. They also ask the second question, is it different ever? Yes, it is. There are some gigantic distinctions between how the ancient Israelite or Hebrew thought about the world and who ran it and the purpose of humans versus their next door neighbors and what they thought about everything. And so what stands out to scholars, certainly for me as a Christian, is to say, that's interesting how they're similar. I'm very interested, but also I'm really interested in how they differ. And why do they differ? And there are times where they're overwhelmingly similar. There are times they could not be more different. So instead of in this study giving you every single time they're different, there will be times I'll say, this is really important, and we'll miss it because I bet Sarah has not studied the Enuma Elish lately. Most people haven't. Most people haven't heard that until I've just said these words, unless you go to school for it. And that's part of my job now. At least my view is that I have the moral duty to help you see that for an ancient Israelite to say these things is deliberately to go against the normal view of the world and their time period. So when we might go, yeah, I've read them my whole life, so what? When they heard these things and the first time they ever heard them and wrote them down, they would have gone, what did you just say? In the beginning, what? God did what? And I'll talk a lot that more later on when we start Genesis. Some things are very different because the Jews had a very particular view of God, and boy, it shone through in how they told their story. Okay, I'm going to go past that. Any questions or comments about that? Either you're in shock or you're just no questions. Okay. In shock? Okay, that's fine. As you mull over this, and I get all my emails this week. Now listen, I'm serious what I said. I'm happy to help, and just like Revelation, right? We talk about end times. You don't have to find all this persuasive, but at least you're going to hear something. Yes, sir. Okay. The the date of Christ's birth. Uh huh. Is there a difference in that date that there is today? That's interesting. After class, we'll talk about that. Okay. That's good just because that's not about Genesis, but the answer is we don't know when he was born. Okay. Letter C. So if you looked at the Bible, just the Old Testament, just it, you just read it carefully, you'll notice that the ancient Hebrews thought about the world basically in three major levels. We call this a three-tier universe, or three-tier, I'll put quotation, cosmos. You need to understand nobody in the ancient world believed in a solar system, a galaxy, or a universe. We have no evidence. David, that sounds bizarre. Now, hold on a second. Wait a second. Until about 15 years ago, we had no idea the universe was as big as it was. It wasn't until the Hubble took exact pictures of the deep space. They went about, I don't know, it was like 20 times. They took the same picture of this speck of blackness. And then they put it all together, and they realized it was bigger than they ever dreamt. I mean, we're still learning how big the universe is. And we have satellites and telescopes that are, it's phenomenal. We're still learning today in 2020. They had no concept of this. So when I say quote unquote cosmos, it is a huge mistake to think they were thinking of solar systems and galaxies. That is a very modern idea. It's true that we have a solar system, but they had no reason to think that. In fact, they had a view that almost everybody did in the ancient world. That is, there's three levels. There's land, sea, and there's the heavens or skies. This is all through the Bible. Now, I don't give every single reference in the Bible. I do. You see EG in the parentheses there? Ergo gratias, that means for example. I'm just giving you for example. And you hear that hum too, right? Okay. Is that his return? Jesus? It's the next balloon, the Russian balloon? Okay. Well, then I'm not worried. The Chinese balloon. Can we mute that? So, for example, Exodus 20, Nehemiah, and Proverbs, you can look all these up. Okay. There's a cosmic landscape. And the cosmic landscape, this is how ancient Hebrews thought about it. The earth is a relatively small, and I say it is. They believed at certain, we look at Ezekiel, look at Revelation, and like Revelation, all the way to Revelation. That's not in the Old Testament. Even to them, they're still going, and I saw the four corners of the earth. Or in Ezekiel 7:2, depending on your translation, it says, and a tree came up in the center of the world, whose branches extended to the end of the earth. They believed the earth was a relatively small place, and it was a flat disc like a record player, like a record. My daughter has really gotten to records lately. She just loves them. I never thought in my life I'd see a record again. Now we got records in our house. But that's exactly how they saw the world. It was a flat disc of land, and it rested on pillars, on big hard things. And they believed, like all ancient people did, that it rested at the end of the world, at the corners of the earth. And it sat there. And right beneath the earth is the realm of the dead. They called Sheol. Sheol. And that's where dead people went. And you look up Isaiah 14, Amos 9. It'll say, if you dig and bury out the dead, they believe they're right beneath it. And the Sheol is a shadow-like existence. You exist, but you're not alive because you don't have a body, but you do exist. But that Sheol is beneath the ground. So when you bury them, yeah, you bury them, but it's also you bury them and you put dirt on it, and then they go live with their ancestors. The sky is divided in two parts. The lower sky is the realm of birds, the clouds, which can also bring rain, and stars. And stars in the lower sky. And this revolves around the land. It revolves around the land. Now, the lower sky also held the heavenly cisterns. They call them cisterns or storehouses where rain, wind, hail, and snow came from. Now, the stars were attached to this firmament. And the word in Hebrew for firmament, which we'll talk more when we get to Genesis, it means something like hammered out. And almost every instance in Genesis and in their cousin language, Akkadian, they all mean the same thing. It means a metal that's been hammered out. And so that's why scholars are convinced what they had in mind was a thin sheet of metal. In Egypt, we have evidence of this. Meteors fell from the sky, and the Egyptian word for iron is metal of heaven, because they thought it came from the firmament. It broke off and fell to the ground. And it was so precious and valuable, this iron was, because they couldn't make it up at the time. They had to find it. King Tut, right? The little dude who died and was, King Tut. In his tomb is a dagger made of that iron. It's made from a meteor because it was so valuable. It's the metal of heaven. They thought it fell off the firmament because ancient cultures believed it was hard. It was metal. Some argued that it was like copper. Others typically said it was clear. And you have examples where the bottom of God's throne is clear, and he used the exact same word of hammered out. And they mean hammered because when you got metal or whatever, you pop, 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 it stretched out as you smashed it. So when it says the heavens were spread out, they also use an analogy of a tent. It's a tent that's been boom, 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 and it stretches out. And the idea is that the stars are stuck on that thing, and the firmament is what moves. It moves around. The land's still, but it moves around. On the other side of this hard, thin layer is a higher sky, or the heavens, and that's where the gods and angels live. And of course, this is the immediate presence of God, or the throne room of God. He's way above that. Now, this is where, if you're not weirded out yet, this is an interesting thing. Around everything, around Sheol, way down low, the land and sky is water. You need to think of all of the cosmos like a big bubble. It's like one big bubble, and it's full of water. Uh, we call them the cosmic seas, and they erupted from below the cosmic seas, in what they call fountains, and that forms rivers and seas. When the flood narrative happens in Noah, they say that from the deeps, the waters deeps below. It's like they pour forward, like they spewed out from all the deep cosmic waters below. They fell from above in what they call the windows of the firmament. God has these big windows, like on a house or a trailer, and he goes, shoop, he opens the windows, and water from the cosmos goes, psh. And at the end of the flood narrative, which we'll see, he says he closes the windows. These primordial seas, they held various unrestrained, we often say in scholarship, chaos creatures. Chaos means unrestrained, non-functional. They're not necessarily evil, they're just chaos creatures, is a good way to say it. Now, and I'll talk more about that probably later, what's so bizarre is in other cultures, they also believed in those beings, but those beings were other gods that needed to be defeated, but not in the Genesis account. God just makes them. Everything God creates, he's just sovereign over everything. And nobody talked that way about their gods. Nobody. So, again, one more time, in the ancient world, when the Hebrews thought about the cosmos, they thought this. So I put some pictures on the screen here. Here's another artistic rendering of it. If I can, let's see if I can get this right. Will you click it? For some reason, I don't know what's going on. There we go. See, I like this artistic rendering here. So way up high is the temple, and they believe that God had his throne room in his temple. And down below, you see what's called Leviathan, who's like a chaos creature. And you see the black in the middle is Sheol. And see the big mountains on the side? The mountains hold up the firmament. The mountains hold the firmament up, that hard shell, and the water pours from, and so that's where rain can come from clouds, but heavy rain comes from above. Here's another picture. I love this one too here. See, it's a big bubble, like a snow globe. And then, and Jews, and basically everybody believed in the ancient world, that the temple on earth, and the Jews were no different from this, temples were gateways. They were intersections of the heavenly realm on earth. And so that's why the temples on earth, they thought, were modeled after the heavenly temple. And that's why God liked to dwell in both places. It's his vacation home. And around the bubble is all water. Beneath it, you see these chaos creatures doing different stuff. And they show up all over in the Psalms and Job. God defeats them or he wrestles them. You'll see all over the place. Little footnote, because I'm a Christian and New Testament specialist, not Old Testament. In the New Testament, by the time we get to the New Testament, Jews have been arguing for a while and anticipating for a while, then Jesus really makes it explicit, that the goal is no longer to separate heaven way up there and earth here, but that these worlds would be intermingled. There would be no firmament blocking it, as it were. These two realms would be all the heavenly realm. Heaven is just it's just where God is. Just where God is. But in the ancient Hebrew view is, he really is up there, but he shows up sometimes down here. And Jesus believed the kingdom of God had burst in his own. He wants these worlds to come together. And that's a new heavens and new earth will be where it's all together. So on your picture on the screen now, you'll see there, again, another explicit example of clouds. I want to pause there. What questions or comments do you have about that? Yes, ma'am. question. So how would I explain how they interpret it versus how we interpret it now? How did they come to these conclusions, you said? Virtually scholars would agree, what I'd be one to say they came to these conclusions because that's what they observed.
with
Their
their limited knowledge.
limited knowledge. That's right.
But if these things had happened now, how would we interpret it? We just say, I mean, just say it was a miracle, or it's not explainable, or
Oh, how would we say it now?
how,
Yeah.
because there's so many that want proof. Show me this happened, show me how it happened,
Mm.
this is how it happened. Everything,
Good question. So I've never thought about that. So what would we do now if we were trying to, like today, if we wrote the creation narrative? Yeah, almost. Well, I know exactly what would happen. I mean, my view. What exactly what happened is what a Western thinker would do would go straight to material origins. Where did all the stuff come from? Because we are obsessed with that. Western thinkers think of stuff, chemistry, physics, and so forth. So we would go straight there, and if we're being very faithful, then we would try to score the same theological points that the author of Genesis did. We take those theological points, but change the details of physics and chemistry and make them overlap. Ancient people did not go straight to material origins. Where'd this stuff come from? They did not do that. They didn't care about it in general. They cared about, and I will talk a lot more about this later on, they cared about who's in control, who's the boss, and who has a function. Walton gives a perfect analogy. When you show up to work and you say, "Where, you know, how do I do my job?" No one busts out the Articles of Incorporation. In 1943, what? I don't what? Who's my boss? What am I doing here? What's my function? No, you need to understand. This building came from wood, cedar wood out of Illinois. And that chair you're sitting on came from China. I was there at the factory with that chemistry. The chemist's name was Sun Kao, and he made the chemistry formulation. You go, I don't, what? Why do you keep shoving material stuff on me? Who's the boss? And what do I do here? That's exactly how ancient people thought about the created order. So what we would do today is we would start going to chemistry and physics and all this stuff to figure out and make arguments of our best, which would be great and fantastic and out of date in 50 years. That's how science works.
interpretation, if I went to that, I wouldn't go there proving and disproving. I would go there trying to prove,
You would go there trying to prove what?
that things did evolve like that, like it was stated in the Bible.
So you would go there trying to prove that it is evolved, like in the Bible. To whom? I mean, to whom are you speaking? Jody? Can you ask Bill if he can get that sound out? Thank you. What's that? So if you're talking to a non-Christian,
Yeah,
gotcha. So if you're talking to a non-Christian and you're trying to understand this part,
I'm trying to prove the matter
you're
of
trying to,
science that it's real, that it happened.
okay. So I think I understand. So if you're talking to a non-Christian, you would try to go to modern science to try to prove this is real.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. I don't, but okay. I don't at all. And the reason why I don't at all, that's a common view. We'll talk about that more in just a second, in fact. The reason why I don't do that is because I try my best to try to understand the text from their perspective.
But their perspective is they're trying to prove that it's not real.
No, I'm sorry. By their perspective, I meant the authors of the text, not a non-Christian. Yeah, I don't mean this. I couldn't care less what their view is about it because they didn't write it. I don't care what their view is. And I really mean I don't care. It's all over YouTube and TikTok and whatever. Well, the Bible, it is so irrelevant. They were just born in the 80s. They don't know anything about. What I care about is what the ancient authors thought. And I respect that so much. I try my best to disabuse myself of everything about me to try to get in their mindset. I like to say it this way. I like to time travel. And no one who wrote these texts was a redheaded white guy from America. None of them were. This is extremely pre-scientific, pre-industrial, pre-everything. And they do not think like I do. And so I want to hear what they have to say first and try my best not to misinterpret it. Then, after I think I've really interpreted correctly, then I'll go talk to the non-Christian, which I do. But I do, and I said, great. But first, I want to try to hear what Genesis says, not what I think it should say, or if a non-Christian's embarrassed by it, and all. I don't.
It's hard to accept that people that say you believe in stuff that isn't proven through your ignorance.
Gotcha. Well, it's hard to, you said it's hard to believe in something someone says you don't believe that because you're ignorant or and so forth. And you don't believe, yeah. So, yeah, and that's true. People do say that's ignorant, you're ridiculous, and whatever. That's true. But my response to that is, well, a lot of things. If someone said, you believe in all that? I go, well, sure I do. What, you believe that the earth is flat and whatever? Well, no, I don't believe that. Well, that's what you're, okay. So if you're saying that a Christian has to believe in how an ancient person saw the world, I fundamentally disagree with you. That is, in my theological view, I have no problem. I believe that God has no problem with us being ignorant about the way the world works. At no point I can find anywhere in the Bible God reveals to them what we would call scientific knowledge. Ever. At no point does it go, Jeremiah say, ancient Israelites, you need to repent, and in 5,000 years you're going to discover a thing called a black hole. You don't know this yet. It won't make any sense to you at all. But E equals MC squared. Who, I got a witness, testify. That would have been the stupidest thing. I mean, I'm just going to call it what it is. That'd be stupid. How mean of God to have people say things they would have no concept of understanding. Where do you start with that? If I time traveled 100 years ago and say, here's my cell phone, now go copy it. I don't know. Where does it start? I don't know. David, did you just? No, I didn't design it. I don't know anything about it. So to this day, right now in 2023, I don't know of a single person, I don't know of a single church that believes God has given them the prophecy to tell them how chemistry works. And they've learned new scientific facts. I don't find that anywhere. In fact, I find no problem with believing God says, yeah, you can be dumb about a lot of things. I don't care about that. What I don't want you to be dumb about is me. That's what I don't want you to be dumb about. You cannot be ignorant about who I am. So the idea that God used people to write in ancient genres that did communicate to them truths about God strikes me as exactly what God would do. So I have no problem with him being ignorant about kidneys not thinking. Did you know there's no Hebrew word for brain? The brain was worthless. Egyptians were so unimpressed by it. When you died, they kept your kidneys, the center of who you are, and they wrapped it into pharaohs in special jars. They put a hook up the nose and ripped out the brain and threw it away. It was worthless. Raise your hand if you think the brain is worthless. Thank you, Jody. So everybody but Jody disagrees with the ancient biblical God-inspired worldview. No one does. Everyone goes, of course, they didn't know any better. What, God didn't reveal that to them? No. You don't like that? I mean, take that up with God. I didn't write it. I didn't write it. I have nothing to do with it. I'm just a Johnny-come. I'm a nobody. All I know is what the text says. And in the ancient world, they had no concept of that. There's no Hebrew word for hurricane. They never experienced a hurricane. How would you explain that to them? It's a big, big, bad storm. Huh? They never met an Eskimo. They never met a Mayan. What? Who are those people? They had no concept. So if a modern non-Christian, and they do tell me, David, you got to believe in all that, it takes me a while. I don't give a 10-second answer. But I'll say, no, you misunderstand. God has no problem, in my view, God never cared about changing their cosmological views. He did care about changing their views of who he was. Yep, I take that seriously. Now, Christians don't all agree upon what God was teaching them about God, God's self. I'm fine with that. But at least we agree very much that the point of the text is, who is God, who are we, and what's our function? Okay, so if I can go ahead real quickly, what do we do, letter D, what do we do with the fact that their view is fundamentally different from any third grader's view today in class? Well, one view, and this is just ignore it all. Just say it's all stupid and dumb and get rid of Genesis. Some people do that. Some well-intentioned Christians do that. Go, that's all just nonsense. Just dismiss it outright. That's not my view. It might be your view. My view is not to do that. I guess I don't see any reason to do that. I don't find that persuasive. The second thing you could do is you interpret everything at face value. Everything at face value. If it says it's flat, it's flat. That's where flat earthers come from, basically. The research I've done on flat earthers. They'll say, well, the Bible says it, and that's it. And so everything else, all the space missions, all the satellite images, everything you see from that, all that's lies. They're devil-worshiping lies trying to trick you because you don't trust the Bible. I've heard that. That's a view. They treat Genesis 1 to 2 as a form of history, as if someone were sitting there with a stenographer just typing out, what happened? The bird? Okay. Then what happened? Uh-huh. Ching. Uh-huh. Okay, keep this record forever, Moses. And this is the basis of young earthers. I fundamentally disagree with everything about them. I have never heard anything from a young earther I find persuasive. You might be one. I love you and I'll break bread with you. I will make disciples beside you all day and night. We are still brothers in Christ. If you want to be with me. Are you a young earther, Red? Okay, never mind. You don't know. He said, I'm a middle earther. Lord of the Ring nerds. That's fine. That's a view. It's a view. They just read it at face value. It's a form of history. And you can do there's tons of books and literature on young, tons of them. That is a view. I find very unpersuasive, and not a single scholar on the planet finds persuasive. But anyway, that is a view. That is a very much view. You can be Christian and have a different view on Genesis, for crying out loud. Another view is called concordism. There's two different kinds of concordist. Where you extract scientific information from the biblical passages. They'll say, well, we know about something called the Big Bang. You read Genesis 1, they go, oh, look, there's the Big Bang. It's there all along. They've been teaching us science. That's a view. I find that not persuasive. I think it's silly. Letter B, you interpret text in the light of modern science. You go, well, if you read Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created him as the earth, which I don't think you should. I'll talk about that later. And then there's a gap in verse 2. This gap theory is that explains why there's billions of years of development. They try to take modern science and smuggle it in. That is a view. But concordism is you're trying to put together, modern scientific development and Genesis. You're trying to make them fit somehow. This is what we call, what's the name of, what's a nickname of concordists? They don't call themselves, they call themselves like design theorist, or what's another word I'm looking for? Intelligent design, things, sometimes it's like that. There's another word I'm looking for too, but technically we call them concordists. That is a view, that's possible. If you know the guy named Hugh Ross, he's an astrophysicist, he's very much concordist. You have some others concordist. Back to young earthers, that's like the Creation Museum, is that in Kentucky? That's all young earth all day long. Answers in Genesis, yeah, that's all young earthers. Concordists would be like Hugh Ross and some others.